Of the Western powers of Europe, Russia is probably the most distinct. While certainly, at least in the Victorian era, a member of the Western world, Russia's society would indicate anything but. The feudal era hasn't quite left Russia yet, and the Tsar enjoys great wealth at the expense of his people. Of course, in real life, the failure of Russia to industrialize would result in a catastrophic level of poverty culminating into the Bolshevik seizure of power during World War I. Thankfully, a smart player doesn't have to let Russia fall to the same fate. Although Russia certainly is backwards, all it'll take is a little bit of breakneck capitalism and imperialism to bring Russia into the modern day and shoot their GDP up to 5 billion. Let's do this. As with just about any nation, the opening moves for Russia revolve around maxing out taxes and getting a solid construction sector going. Early game Russia is actually extremely strong because of their massive forests, since construction is mostly done with wood in the early game. Having access to the largest supply of wood in the world leaves you pretty well off. The second thing we do is get corn laws going. We're doing this to get the Modern Conservative event, which in my case happened almost instantly. Modern Conservative replaces the current landowner interest group leader with a new one that has the market liberal ideology. I was actually pretty surprised to see it that early, but unfortunately you can't change interventionism without abolishing serfdom, so that early advantage doesn't mean a whole lot. In order to get serfdom abolished, I'm going to have to rely on some RNG. I'm going to throw the rural folk in with the landowners to give me a 7% chance to abolish serfdom. If it works, it works. If not, then I'll just keep trying until it does. In the meantime, let's start imperializing. Despite Russia's outmoded military, they can make most nations back down with purely intimidation tactics, and barring any intervention from a European power, Central Asia is pretty much yours for the taking. I'd recommend just immediately puppeting Persia, since it would be more annoying to conquer each of their states, and the infamy cost is surprisingly low. Persia is good to have because of the access they give you to both India and Arabia, even though Persia itself doesn't have a whole lot of valuable resources. Later on, Persia will have oil, but Russia also has lots of oil on its own, so it's not too important. The resource of highest value in Persia is sulfur, which we lack in most of Russia. In my run, Persia backed down, but if they don't, you should be able to defeat them. You can even naval invade around Tabriz and open up 2 fronts, which will make this war trivial. Next up, I went for Afghanistan, again with a puppet play, and Kalat supported them. To me, this was a good thing since it meant I could conquer Baluchistan alongside Afghanistan. For this war, they didn't back down, and Afghanistan is a surprisingly defensible nation. I had to capitulate Kalat first and use them as a backdoor into Kabul, since breaking through the mountains in West Afghanistan was taking forever. Looking back home, I was building up my tools and logging industries since I knew that I'd be expanding my construction a lot, and I'd be needing lots of wood for that. The tools are for the second level production method in the logging camps, and for mines that I'll be building in the near future. My bid to abolish serfdom also failed, so I cancelled it and would wait a while to try again. In the meantime, I went for dedicated police just because all my interest groups were happy with it, so I might as well make them a bit happy while waiting for another chance at serfdom. Once Kalat capitulated, the fronts multiplied, and suddenly Afghanistan had no one on the border, so I just marched freely into Kabul. The nice thing about Afghanistan is all their opium, which once I annex them, I'll put to great use for the nation. Oh yeah, I started colonizing Kazakhstan as well, since I completely forgot to be doing that. Continuing right on though, I went to puppet the Sikh Empire since I was planning to run my agriculture out of Punjab later on. In this war, Qing got involved, which could have been scary, except Qing ultimately is a paper tiger with no real ability to fight in the first few years of the game. The war against Punjab was slow because of all the Chinese bodies on the border, but I would push through eventually. I also tried to abolish serfdom again, and this time I got it with a 9% chance. Initial bad luck aside, abolishing serfdom in 1840 as Russia is pretty good, and since I had that Modern Conservative event, I was able to head straight into interventionism too. Funnily enough, passing interventionism ended up taking forever, just because even with such high chances of success, it just kept failing. I eventually hit a 75% chance, and finally got it while I was conquering the Kazakhs. Anyway, those are the opening moves for a good run as Russia. Conquer up the Punjab, reform to interventionism, and have around 60 construction points by 1842. If you've got all that, you're basically completely unstoppable. Where do we go from here, I wonder? I'll be honest with you, Russia is completely, absolutely broken. Perhaps even more so than France, Russia is able to, right from the beginning of the game, basically dominate economically without even going over the infamy cap. All those wars I did in the opening moves, I'm still below 100 infamy. That means I'm going to use this video as more of a general economy guide similar to my Qing video, except I'll try to really go in depth on what exactly I'm building and why. You might have noticed in the previous section that I'd queued up a bunch of wheat farms. This is because in a high population country, you're going to have lots of unemployed and peasant pops. Generally speaking, unemployed and peasant pops don't contribute very much to the country, so we want to fix that as soon as possible. The best way to create hundreds of thousands of jobs in a relatively short time is early game agriculture. Before the invention of the tractor, a farm needed thousands of low-skill workers just to operate, and we're going to use that to our advantage in order to provide jobs, which will give our pops wages and give them income we can tax. Your goal, as the state, is to grow your economy with jobs that provide you with taxes. In the early game, most of your taxes come from poll taxes, but heading into the late early game and early mid-game, you'll shift towards income taxes with the per capita taxation law. Since we're Russia and we've already mostly escaped the early game by getting interventionism, we need to start generating jobs. My favorite early game job generating strategy is the infinitely looping economic supply chain of livestock and grain. With the intensive agriculture technology, you can start using fertilizer for your farms, and you can generate fertilizer with your livestock ranches. This loop generates excess grain, which can be consumed by pops, and at low standards of living, grain is the most consumed food good. Meat can also be consumed by higher level pops, so our livestock will be feeding the upper classes, while the farms will be feeding the lower classes. So how long do we build up the agriculture loop before moving on? Basically up until there's not enough infrastructure to support it anymore. I'm building most of the agriculture in Ukraine because they have an agriculture throughput modifier there, and I'm choosing to stop building once there's no more infrastructure there. We'll have to wait for railways to build up more in that location. You'll notice that my standard of living and GDP are steadily rising as I build up all this stuff because I'm able to produce a huge amount of grain and meat, which my pops are also now able to buy cheaply. When standards of living go up, minimum wages go up, which means my tax income will also increase alongside it. I eventually interrupted this continuous agricultural growth to build up some coal and iron mines for eventual inputs in the steel industry. Steel isn't important right now, but will be later on once we get into railways, and for the best tool workshop production methods. While I was building up the mines in the east, I decided to go and conquer the Central Asian nations I left behind. This is mostly for aesthetic reasons, since these nations don't have much to offer, except Khiva, which has oil. Those wars were entirely uneventful, so I won't cover them. I started to build up some government bureaucracies in the states where I had spammed out farms, since the tax efficiency there wasn't so good, and to help support those bureaucracies, I built some paper mills too. All the wood in Russia makes paper production pretty easy. I was also trying to get a professional army going, and despite the high chance to pass, it just wasn't in the cards. Oh well, I eventually just started building up the agricultural sector again, happy that I'd be taxing it more efficiently with the new government bureaucracies. It was around 1850 that I started to consider moving outside of the agricultural sector, so I built up steel mills and motor industries for railways. I was also mining the little bit of sulfur in Russia which I would use for my paper mills later. I was at 75 million GDP at this point, which means I've grown the GDP by about 50% in the past 15 years. That's a GDP growth rate of about 3.33% per year, which is about what the real-life GDP growth rate of the United States averages year over year, not counting recent pandemic-born outliers. Anyway, that's enough agriculture. Now that I'm looking towards railways, it's time to focus on other goods that can increase standards of living and which can generate lots of juicy jobs which we can make huge income taxes off of. At this point, we've got plenty of agriculture, so it's time to work on more advanced manufacturing. I usually build up industries in a sort of Maslow's hierarchy sense of order. I start with construction goods and government goods, since those are needed to do everything else. And then I move to agriculture. Most early game pops consume lots of raw agricultural goods. From there, I get started on raw materials like iron and coal, which are necessary for advanced goods like steel and motors, which I then use for railways. Without railways, your industries will always fall behind due to infrastructure shortages. Once I've got railways going, I focus on manufactured consumer goods like clothes and furniture, which are used exclusively by my own pops. We're currently on this stage. After this will come the military, and after that, finally, comes goods for export. The levels of the pyramid aren't always completely set in stone, and some economies will have to skip steps, but as Russia, there's no reason to not just follow the steps exactly. Speaking of military, by the way, I decided to annex Afghanistan at this point because I was planning to use all their opium for some solid profits via trade and domestic consumption later on, and they actually resisted me. Obviously, they stood no chance when they had a million fronts to deal with, but Oman supported them, which I used as an opportunity to puppet them. This gives me a foothold in Arabia, as well as in Africa thanks to Zanzibar. Next up was the Sikh Empire, which unfortunately got Austria's support. I just ignored Austria though, and focused on the Sikh Empire. Ultimately, as long as the Austrians never reach St. Petersburg, they'll never capitulate me. Not that it mattered. The Sikhs ended up backing down anyway. All this time, I'm just building textile industries. It doesn't really matter where you build them, but I put mine in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, mostly just because they lost available pops. I started making silk plantations in Punjab at the same time, since I wanted to make some luxury clothes for my pops too. As well, I implemented landed voting so that parties could form. One nice side effect of market liberal landowners is that they'll form a political party with the industrialists, which lets me kickstart the capitalist resurgence in Russia. By sharing clout with the landowners, the industrialists will very quickly become powerful, which massively increases the capitalist contribution to the investment pool. Unfortunately for me, the Octoberist party had way more momentum than my peaceful revolution party, but nonetheless, a coalition government of Orthodox priests, industrialists, and landowners looked good to me. Anyway, I continued building up the textiles industries, and you might be noticing that my standard of living is actually decreasing. In reality, it's not that my standard of living is actually going down, it's that I just annexed several tens of millions of pops into the country via Afghanistan and the Sikh Empire, so their low standard of living kinda tanked my nation's average. In reality, people are still gaining standards of living across the nation. In general, the higher the population, the more slowly standard of living will grow or shrink. I saw that Russia has a journal entry for the Trans-Siberian Railway, but I didn't want to read which states I needed to build railways in to make it happen, so I instead went and just built a railway in literally every state in the country. They'll need it eventually, so I might as well just do it now. If you're playing optimally, you don't want to overbuild railways like this, but I'm fine with taking a little bit of a loss to the government balance in return for not having to read. During this time, I also was able to finally get professional army and annex Persia. I also went after Sindh, who got the help of Qing. Qing even added a war goal to free Kokand, which was a little concerning because it wasn't entirely out of the cards that they might occupy their war goal, and my ability to capitulate Qing wasn't particularly strong, since I had no war goals on them. The war went fine, but it dragged on forever, with me waiting for Qing to accept the White Peace. Remember that without a war goal, you can never get the -2 war support modifier from holding war goals, and when such a huge enemy like Qing, I'd have to occupy a ton of land to even make a dent in their war support. They actually got pretty close to capitulating me before I managed to White Peace them, since they got a piece of Kokand and I couldn't push them out quickly enough. Everything worked out fine though, so it's all good. I decided to finish up Central Asia by conquering Makran next. They just backed down. I also turned Finland into a puppet, since puppets pay a tax to their overlord while personal unions do not. Anyway, it's 1860, and I've got 150 million GDP, although it wasn't particularly through shrewd economic planning that I achieved that, rather it was through outright conquest. The addition of textile mills to my nation has given my pops an even higher standard of living, and I've also got railways across the entire country. I had an interesting occurrence during this run. A nation attacked me for a war goal that wasn't cut down to size. For how amazed I was to see an AI actually attack me for a real war goal, I was actually a little bit scared, given that Britain is no joke. They wanted a treaty port in Zanzibar, and they want to take Oman from me. To be honest, those war goals wouldn't matter much to me if they were enforced, but obviously I'm not going to just lie down and let that happen. I was considering liberating British Raj as a way to really screw over Britain, but I also thought that I'd have some trouble actually getting that war goal. Instead, I decided to just get war operations by occupying Guyana. The war was entirely uneventful from there. I held off the Indian fronts the best I could, but Britain never even attempted to take Zanzibar, let alone Oman, so it kinda just sat there holding Guyana while Britain's Indian subjects threw themselves at my armies. I eventually won, and took Britain's money with relative ease. During the war, I was building up my gold reserves instead of building up more construction sectors because I planned to switch over to iron frame construction, and I didn't want to risk any economic problems while switching. When you switch construction types, you will inevitably see a huge shakeup to your economy, and a solid chunk of gold reserves can keep any adverse effects from that relatively minimal. I was building up lots of iron mines and tool workshops in preparation for the switch. Something else came up before I switched over though. I annexed Khiva, and Qing joined in the war. This time though, I wouldn't let Qing get away unscathed. To me, the only rightful price for Qing's continued insolence was Beijing, a treaty port, and an open market. Kokand was, of course, no match for me, and Qing made the classic AI mistake of putting the entire military force on the front line, leaving their soft underbelly exposed. I simply naval invaded Beijing with no resistance whatsoever, and then spread out from there. Once Qing turned its army around to confront me, I just sat in defense mode and sat there until I won. Whether Qing was able to win any battles or not, they had no chance of pushing my army out of Beijing completely before they would get capitulated. Getting Beijing is always nice because the Forbidden Palace increases government legitimacy pretty nicely. As well, that treaty port will be useful for shipping opium en masse straight into the Chinese people's veins. Since I hold Afghanistan, I have basically the largest supply of opium in the world, and I'm not afraid to ship it around. Stepping back for a second, I also decided to aim for universal suffrage during this war, which actually had a hugely negative effect on my budget, since the industrialists became upset over this. They went from providing bonus investment pool contributions to hiding their taxes from me, which meant I was missing some money. But luckily, I had the gold reserve left over from earlier, which I was using to sustain myself while I was fixing the problem. I probably could have fixed things with some smart replanning of the economy, but ultimately I decided to be lazy and just temporarily increase taxes to the medium level. This completely fixed my problem, although I'd want to lower them again later on. I did manage to pass universal suffrage in age 66, which was nice since I could get interest groups like the trade unions and industrialists even more power through voting. In order to make the industrialists happy again, I started passing private healthcare next, which I wanted anyway since healthcare is nice to have, and I intend for everyone to eventually be rich, so healthcare access shouldn't be a problem later on. The clergy were threatening a revolution unless I repealed those voting rights, but I knew that they weren't going to do anything drastic unless another interest group joined them. I wanted to really accelerate my GDP growth at this point, so I decided to just spam out a bunch of commodity goods in Punjab alongside some railways to support them. Since Punjab has an agriculture modifier and has millions of workers available, I can extremely quickly employ all those people and get huge profits there. One thing to keep in mind is that Punjab is unincorporated, which means I don't get any taxes, but the profits on industries there can still contribute to the investment pool. That means I can't make money off those plantations directly, but I could save myself some construction costs by building there. In particular, once I get the mutual funds technology, I can tack on capitalists to those buildings with the publicly traded ownership method. Aristocrats don't contribute very much to the investment pool, but capitalists sure do. So that tech will change everything once I get it. Besides that, the GDP that these buildings will create also increases my minting, which means that I can increase my budget even more, just off of my economy growing, even if it goes untaxed. I also decided it was time to focus on the next step of Maslow's economic pyramid of Victoria 3, and built up some munitions plants. I unlocked shrapnel artillery and skirmish infantry a little while ago, which together will be the strongest army on the planet. I've got access to lots of lead through various sources in Central Asia, and I've been building up chemical plants for fertilizer. All I have to do is switch them over to making explosives, and I can make lots of ammunition for my army. I also started all the opium plantations in Afghanistan at this point, both for export and for usage in the army as medical supplies. One thing I often overlook as a player myself, which I'm trying to fix, is that I often ignore trade and just let the AI make trade routes with me while I protect my domestic supply at all times. I inadvertently have become a god of exports with over 130k in tariff income while having done basically nothing. Most of my exports are just random goods, although lots of wood apparently, which is fine, since I plan to switch over to iron frame buildings soon anyway. In theory, you can use trading to really create an insane government budget, but because the AI's demand for goods often can never reach the insane heights that I can generate with my own pops, I don't find it worth it. I'm almost always better off just manufacturing for a consumer economy over trying to create an export economy. The last thing I've been doing, which I haven't mentioned much, is incorporating much of the country as I've been building more bureaucracies. Normally I don't bother incorporating most states, but in this case I'm planning to get to 5 billion GDP, so I'm going to need as much tax income as I can get. Normally once you grow to about a billion GDP, the game is more or less already over, and your choices over whether or not to incorporate areas is mostly meaningless. If you want to be optimal though, it's wise to incorporate as much territory as you can, so long as you can build the bureaucracy to support it. I continue just building up more and more agriculture over in Punjab and making more textiles in the Baltics, when I suddenly got the Springtime of the People's Journal entry. In my case, I had already fulfilled most of its requirements, except I wasn't a republic yet, so I decided that I'd try to fulfill a revolutionary victory because why not? I really dislike civil wars, so I'm gonna do my best to not enter one during this journal entry, and although that makes this much harder to do, it is possible. I basically let in every radical that appeared. But unfortunately, radicals don't always believe in a republic, they only support voting rights, so it wasn't much help for me. Besides the politics though, you can really see my GDP getting huge here. As in 1871, I've reached 320 million GDP. I got a bit cocky and decided to attack Austria so I could try and cripple them early due to their general overperformance in the game these days. I called in Prussia to help me, and then France joined in on Austria's side. It was time for what essentially could be classified as a world war, at least in the World War I sense, given that ultimately this is basically just a continental European war. War with Austria is never easy. Their capital is tucked away safely away from any coastlines and behind lots of mountains and high infrastructure terrain. For that reason, my chances in this war were pretty slim without immense human cost. Prussia was much weaker than I expected and folded to Austrian and French pressure relatively quickly, although their fight was valiant. Even my own troops had trouble making any headway against the French and Austrian coalition forces. The big problem was that the French troops were of high enough quality to usually hold me off, while the Austrian troops were numerous enough to overwhelm me. That being said, this war would end up being a complete stalemate, with the true pain being economic. Luckily for me, in the economic battle, I win every time, given my 400 million GDP. I can be at war for decades and not even notice, while Austria and France were quickly falling into debt. In 1871, after many years of stagnant war, I was able to get one of my war goals in Austria enforced: liberating Hungary. Obviously, I'd have liked to have gotten all my war goals, but I wasn't interested in sitting around to watch Austria's economy die for decades. Releasing Hungary from Austria is usually something of a death blow to them anyway, so that was good enough for me. Throughout the war, I had been building up various buildings, essentially just referencing my market for expensive goods, and building up production for those goods ad nauseum. By the way, in 1875, there was a Dixie plurality in some random Arctic wasteland in northern Russia. Guess Texas was too hot, and those Dixie folk got lost on their way to Montana, which I think is really funny. Anyway, that was basically the biggest war of this run so far, and it ended up in a stalemate where I came out on top. Works for me. In 1876, I was considering making moves into Carpathia, but I was also thinking about my own internal politics. I wanted to become a republic so I could complete the Springtime of the People's Journal entry. As part of encouraging movement away from the conservative establishment, I built up some universities across the entire country. When I say some, I mean an absolutely ridiculous number, since I knew that I was going to produce far more innovation than my innovation cap, but my real reason to build these universities is to ensure that there are qualifications in every state, and to shift my demographics a little closer to the intelligentsia. Becoming a republic without a civil war can be extremely difficult, but it becomes easier the more clout you give to interest groups that want a republic. As part of the intellectualization of Russia, I also passed the total separation law so I could discriminate against my non-orthodox pops less. In general, discrimination is not good in this game, since pops who are discriminated make fewer wages, thus paying fewer taxes, and by extension of their lower wages aren't as wealthy. Without that wealth, they consume fewer goods, which makes consumer good industries less profitable. Basically, discrimination sucks, but its upside is more authority. In the early game, authority is great for getting a leg up with consumption taxes and decrees, but eventually a liberalized nation will usually do better than a conservative one. Anyway, with all these radical interest groups forming, the Trudovik Party is really gaining huge momentum in elections. This is good for my goal of being Republican, since although radicals don't demand republics, the interest groups that are radical in my game want a republic by their basic ideologies. The 1878 election would see a landslide radical victory, with 80% of the votes going to the Trudoviks. I decided to try going to a council republic since it was an option, and I had an okay level of support for it, but the conservative establishment was looking for a revolution, and I had no intention of doing that, so I dropped the issue quickly after. In the wake of a near revolution, I decided to pass the much more popular multiculturalism to finally truly end discrimination in all of Russia, although that law was taking its sweet time passing. I also took the time to make all my businesses publicly traded, so I could generate more capitalists and thus more investment pool. I also decided to spark yet another war against Austria. My goal was to get control of Galicia, since that region has a ton of resources, and it would further cripple Austria. The Ottomans joined in, and I added war goals to free Iraq, so I could later take Basra and Baghdad for their oil. I was gearing up for war, until suddenly Austria just backed down and handed me their piece of Moldova. That was fine with me, I suppose, although I'd really like to cut down Austria. I was able to pass multiculturalism afterwards, and that got me the new Colossus modifier, which gives me a nice migration attraction modifier across the entire nation. This won't mean much unless I get some more puppets in the future, but rest assured that will be the direction I take this nation in due time. Anyway, this is where I'm going to cut the first part of my Russia guide. I've hit almost 600 million GDP, and Russia is clearly the strongest power on Earth. Between 1860 and 1880, the GDP has grown from 150 million to 600 million. That's a 400% increase over 20 years, which is an average annual GDP growth of 20%. I don't know of any nation on Earth that exists with a GDP growth rate that high. That being said, the goal of 5 billion GDP is still some distance away. We will get there, but that'll be on the next episode of the Russia Gigachad guide. Hopefully you've learned something from this run, and you'll have more to learn on the next part where we'll take Russia to even further heights. Russia truly is an insanely powerful nation with its huge population and its resources, and access to juicy conquests in Asia. I hope you enjoyed watching. Thank you for your time.